So today I'm going to be doing a video on how the South of the United States became so dependent on slavery in terms of their economy. And the reason I'm doing this is because I thought I might as well do a whole series on slavery, and I can't exactly do that without talking about the Civil War, 1861 to 1865. But of course, before I even talk about that, I kind of need to talk about one of the main reasons why there was even a war. That is slavery, and that is especially in the South. Because the reason the South was so keen on keeping their slaves was not because it partially was, but because they just wanted to screw people over. No, it was because if they didn't, their economy would collapse. And so that's what they had to do. But yeah, and today you're gonna find out why their economy was so dependent on slavery. So you need to keep in mind that back then it wasn't there weren't huge factories with machines and stuff. It was manual labor. It was hard handiwork that needed, people to be there and work hard for it. And especially by the late 1600s and by even before that, American industry, I say late 1600s because that's when the colonies really started appearing. America was really dependent on agricultural labor, agricultural, that industry. And this is prior to the Industrial Revolution, so of course they needed people to actually work there. But I mean, it wasn't a sophisticated job. Not people just didn't want to do it. However, those poor unemployed people from Europe who came to the colonies, they needed to find work, and so they went there, and they received food, they received a home, they received some stuff in return. Sometimes money, sometimes like actual goods. But by 1680, Britain had become more stable in terms of the economy, and there were more jobs being available. There were more jobs available for people there in Britain. I need to stress again how back then, 1680, the American Revolutionary War hasn't happened and will not happen for another 100 years. So, keep that in mind. So, of course, with more and more jobs appearing in Britain, more and more people stayed in Britain instead of going to the colonies for jobs. But people in the colonies still needed to survive. And how would they do this? Well, they would just enslave African people and have them work there without paying them. Because why not? And it became a necessity to keep society going, and they just did it. And then at one point, there weren't any moral questions. They were just like, oh yeah, sure, let's get some African person to work in terrible conditions for free because we need to live comfortably. Well, in the South, especially with the climate and whatever on the land, instead of having individual farms, they started making plantations to get crops like tobacco, sugarcane, rice. And so these places required a lot of land and a lot of labor. So more and more and more slaves. In that sense. So they need free labor because they couldn't afford paying people to actually work there. So slavery is the answer. Thing is, so many people went to slave markets to buy slaves that demand was created. And I know I've said this term a lot in these videos, but back then people were a product. So demand was created. So more and more people were transported. And to make things worse, the fertility rate was increasing amongst slaves, meaning there were more people available. And slave markets, slave trading, these boomed during this period. It was the golden age of slavery, if you know what I mean. And if you've seen literally any movie or anything about it, you know how they portray this. You know how they're like, oh, we have this person, look at their teeth, look at their physical state, their height, whatever. And they're sold like animals, and that's actually how it happened. There's this great Key and Peele sketch on slavery. It's comedy, obviously, but it does kind of show you a bit what would go on in one of these slave auctions, and they were literally sold like animals. I mean, they had to inspect their teeth, their body, their strength, whatever. And the way it would work is it would sell to the highest bidder. The person who had the most money would take the slave. And by 1800s, around, just a few years before the Civil War broke out, a person, able-bodied man, could go for around $2,000. This is dollars in 1850. So imagine how much it would be today. And the thing is, the great problem is that slave labor had become such key to keeping up industries and businesses and the economy that people thought, yeah, it's wrong, but if I don't do it, I'm gonna die. So let's just get some other people to work to their deaths, because it's not me, it's them. So haha, suck it. That was the attitude to the majority of people. Yeah, they saw slavery as morally wrong, but it was a way to survive, because that was a way to get money for their businesses. So they just let it slide. This whole all men are created equal, total BS. Well, Thomas Jefferson, he really controversial figure. Even before the Constitutional Convention, he tried to denounce slavery, and the topic was even brought up at the 1787 Constitutional Convention. And Thomas Jefferson was the person who wrote Life, Liberty, and the Pursuit of Happiness. Happiness. And all men are created equal. He still owned slaves. Still had probably children with his slave Sally Hemings. But it was a way of life. And one article where I got some of my information from, it says that this need for economy completely trumps over the moral dilemma. And it's true, it's just morality is forgotten. So, around the time of the Constitutional Convention, 1787, around 700,000 people were enslaved in the US. And I'm not even going to get into the amount of money that was. Because if an able-bodied man could go for $2,000, 700,000 people. Let's say for average 1,000. That's still, $700 million. in the industry, and that's not even accounting for inflation. Well, so eventually got to a point where the issue of slavery became such important, like so important, and gained such importance that it came up in Congress in terms of representation and voting and whatever. States from the South, like Georgia or the Carolinas, they thought, each enslaved person should be counted along with the whites. The North said, well, that's not fair. That's more votes. No. So, each enslaved person was now worth 3/5 of a person. One person is worth 3/5 of another person. That makes absolutely no sense. One person is one person. You're not worth a fraction of a person. And, well, they agreed that slave trade would not happen for another 20 years until 1807. So by 1808, it was already, it would be allowed. But yeah, it wasn't abolished by any means. And of course, this is prior to the Civil War, so surprise, surprise. Well, the colonies, before the revolution even took place, had their own, trading, well, they traded their own stuff. But the main thing being tobacco. Actually, a guy who made tobacco, George Washington. So, just to give you an idea of the vast amounts of tobacco that were exported, 60,000 pounds, not pounds as in currency, as in weight, was exported in 1622. And just 17 years later, it was 1.5 million pounds. And by the 1700s, when that came around, it was 20 million pounds a year. And, well, Britain benefited from this, obviously, but after the revolution, they started, not cutting it as much, because of course it didn't benefit Britain, because the profits and the taxes would no longer go to Britain. And, well, they actually considered tobacco to be this huge competitor to other crops. But tobacco, like with most things, had a peak, a point in which it was extremely prominent and then disappeared. And that is exactly what happened. But at the same time as tobacco was kind of falling behind, a new thing happened. That is cotton. Cotton became the new tobacco. Well, cotton, you don't just pick it and that's it. You need to pick it, you need to clean it, you need to process it. It's hard. It's not an easy process. This guy in 1794, Eli Whitney, he made this device that would allow for the cotton balls to be combed and their seeds would be removed. Well, one slave, they could do one of this, they could do 10 pounds of this in one day. The cotton gin could do 100 pounds. It was tamed 10 times. It's more efficient. But of course, okay, so you devise this thing. You think, hey, slavery is solved. They don't need as many slaves. Wrong. More and more production leads to more and more exports and exportation. And they needed to, build more boats. They need to build better steam engines. They needed to build more stuff to make sure the cotton was transported correctly. So yeah, slavery in the factories wasn't as prominent, but slavery elsewhere, it was. Well, the South was ideal for this because I told you about the plantations, the land, the climate, whatever. It was ideal for this. So there were more slaves there because, well, the South exported more things than the North. So naturally, it's going to have more slaves. And, well, yeah, it's just that, and cotton developing and that industry, building and building and building and building and creating more and more demand for slaves and be able to take care of it. It just creates, like I mentioned before, an economy more dependent on slavery. Because, like I said, this invention made in 1794, it could have, reduced the amount of slaves, but yes, it's more efficient. But it still needs to be processed. And after being processed, it needs to be transported and traded and whatever. And that required, supposedly, slaves. So, yeah. And, that's the reason why, I'm going to get behind the reason. Tomorrow I'm probably going to do a video on the reasons for the Civil War breaking out. But one of the main ones is slavery, and it's this idea of the North, which, by the way, I'm not saying the North didn't have, their morally ambiguous stuff. They probably had slaves. Definitely did. But their economy wasn't built around that. The South was. And when it came for the term of abolishing slavery, when that term appeared, the North was, okay, the South panicked. And that's it. So yeah, I'm going to leave it there. Tomorrow I'm going to do a video on the reasons for the Civil War. So yeah, I'm going to leave it there. So thank you for watching. I hope you liked it and I hope you found it interesting. Bye.